Comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1 in the name of Dr. Russel Norman.
Mr. Speaker,
My
question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, why has he announced that the government plans to end its asset sales program, given that he claims it has been a success?
The Honourable Bill English.
I merely pointed out that the government's only plans are the share offer program set out in January 2011, on which we campaigned all of election year, and in which election the government actually won, not the opposition, as they alleged the other day. If there were any further share sales, we would be transparent about it and campaign on it. The program is a success because we have met the objectives we set 3 years ago in the sales that we have executed so far, with another one to be completed today or tomorrow.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can he categorically rule out selling Kiwibank at any point in the future, given that when he was asked in 2008 whether he wants to sell Kiwibank, his answer was eventually but not now?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that I understand was a tape recording which, by the admission of the person who recorded it, was doctored, and I can give the member that categorical assurance.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can he categorically rule out selling the $1.3 billion Landcorp at any point in the future, given that it was National Party policy to sell Landcorp in the 2005 election campaign, when the current Prime Minister was National's finance spokesperson?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government is actually selling bits of Landcorp all the time. The member may not be aware of it, but the point of Landcorp was to preserve lands and survey farms for the purposes of treaty settlements. As treaty settlements are executed, the government is involved in selling bunches of 5, 6 farms. Now, I know that offends the Greens deeply, because they think the government should own all the farms and then shut them down. But actually, we want to get on with treaty settlements. Landcorp's also buying and leasing farms as well.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Given that was a no, can he categorically rule out selling the remaining 51% of the electricity companies?
Point of order, Dr. Jerry Brown.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, that's probably
I'm not surprised you make that mistake, Mr. Speaker. Can I just ask you to consider whether or not it's appropriate for someone asking a question to start with the words, given that's a no? Mr. Speaker, that's not acceptable, and Mr. Norman needs to be held to account.
Yeah, no, well, it's certainly not a useful way to start a question, because in actual fact it wasn't factual, given the answer the Minister gave. But in this case, if the member could just ask a supplementary question, he would assist the order of the House.
Well, point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Dr. Russel Norman.
Can I take it from your intervention, Mr. Speaker, that you have interpreted the Minister's answer as a yes?
Yeah. I certainly interpreted the answer as a satisfactory answer to the question that the member gave. Now, if the member wants... Order! If the member wants to continue asking supplementaries on this question, then we will do so. But if not, we will move to question number 2.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russel Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister categorically rule out selling the remaining 51% of the electricity companies that remain in public ownership at any point in the future, given that partial privatisation was a stepping stone to full privatisation for the Bank of New Zealand in the 1990s?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I can give the member that assurance, and I'm pleased that he has now realised that these companies are 51% owned by government. and I hope he will inform all of those who want to vote in his referendum that that is the case, because those who have listened to him so far think that these companies have been 100% sold when they haven't.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can he categorically rule out privatising ACC at any point in the future, given that it was a previous National Party government that privatised ACC in the past?
Honourable Bill English.
Mr. Speaker, yes, I can do that. But I'm very pleased with the performance of our ACC ministers, Nick Smith and Judith Collins, who've overseen a remarkable turnaround in the performance of that organisation after it was left in a complete mess by the previous government.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the Minister's previous comments in support of Kiwibank, in light of the fact that it has been National Party policy previously to sell Landcorp, and that the previous government did privatise ACC, National Party government, isn't it true that the National Party wants to sell assets, but it's public pressure that prevents them from doing so?
Honourable Bill English.
No, Mr. Speaker. What's true is that when the National Party sets out to execute a policy that is challenging for the public, we make it quite transparent what we are going to do. If we are elected, give the voters the chance to cast their vote knowing those policies have been proposed. I would invite that member to set out just as transparently the impact of his climate change policy on household costs in detail before the next election, so voters have the chance to look at that.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, how can members of the public express their opposition to the government's asset sales program?
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they take the opportunity, I'm sure, sometimes to address that directly to MPs. They had the opportunity in the 2011 election to weigh up the significance of that policy versus others, and if they followed the direction of the member, they knew that the 2011 election was a referendum on asset sales. And as I recall it, under the rules of our democracy, the National Party and its supporters won that election. In fact, the opposition didn't win the election, as that member claimed last week.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Dr. Russell Norman.
Is public pressure the only thing that will stop National privatising more assets, given their intent from the past? And that public pressure can be expressed first by voting no to asset sales in the upcoming referendum, a perfect way for the public to have their views expressed.
Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member's now scraping around for a reason to try and make his referendum look relevant, when of course it never was, because the government had a mandate, and it got that mandate because it announced its policy 11 months ahead of an election, campaigned on it in detail, debated it with the opposition, and one of the results of that was that the National Party received the highest ever single-party vote under MMP. So we have proceeded with that plan. It's almost finished, and the member can do what he likes with his referendum.
Order. Order. Question number 2.
Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to raise a point of order under Speaker's ruling 1521. This question number 2 was originally set down for the Prime Minister and sought as to whether he stood by a particular statement that he had made. The government has chosen to transfer that to the Attorney General. Under 1521 and also 1515, which would allow you to potentially not allow the transfer of a question. The practice of the government, and when we ask questions about specific statements that have been made, in this case by the Prime Minister, to transfer that to the Attorney General, I do believe breaches these Speaker's rulings, because how Mr Finlayson would be able to read the mind of the Prime Minister in this case, I don't know. And I'd ask under what circumstances you would be prepared to intervene in a situation such as this, when a question is about out whether a particular minister, in this case the Prime Minister, stands by the statement, and that's why we put the question down to the Prime Minister.
Speaking to the point of order, the Honourable Jerry.
Mr Speaker, can I suggest that if the member had watched the news for perhaps just the first few minutes of the last number of days, he would have realised that there was always going to be a question about who might be answering this particular question. And it does raise the issue of, if it was so specific to a minister, why in the circumstances was it asked of that minister, given the knowledge that the opposition had about the ability of that minister to answer today?
Speaking to that point of order, Mr Speaker.
I will hear from Grant Robertson.
Well, that's all very well, and I did watch the news at least until the first ad break, and I did notice that the Prime Minister wasn't here. That is, of course, irrelevant in this House, because Mr English is the acting Prime Minister and speaks for the Prime Minister, and we wanted to know if the Prime Minister stood by his statement.
Order. Can I address the last part of the first point of order the member raised, and what circumstances I would not consider accepting a transfer? And that would be a circumstances where I saw it was an attempt by the government not to give an answer to this House as required. In this particular case, I'm aware of a discussion that took place with the Office of the Clerk. The essence of the question is what is important, and the essence of the question is the government believe there's no course of actions to further consider compensation. In that regard, the government speaks with one voice. And on this occasion, I think the government have a perfect right, in line with the standing order to which the member refers, 1521, to make that transfer. So the question has been transferred, and now the member, the Honourable David Cunliffe, can indeed ask the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Attorney-General.